In 1971, a man vanished into a storm with $200,000 in cash. All he left behind was a tie, holding secrets no one saw coming. Black suit, skinny tie, dark sunglasses. He quietly boarded Flight 305, calling himself Dan Cooper. Not long after takeoff, a flight attendant received a slip of paper. A short note.
There's a bomb in my bag. Do exactly as I say and no one gets hurt.
The demands were simple. $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. After landing, every passenger walked away unharmed. Only a skeleton crew stayed on board. The plane took off again. Soon, the 727 rear staircase was lowered mid-flight. Nighttime storm, rain slamming sideways. Without a glance back, Cooper jumped. He disappeared forever. The investigation kicked off immediately. A search zone stretching over 400 square miles. Helicopters, troops, bloodhounds. Everything was thrown at it. But no body, no parachute, no money. All that remained in his seat was a clip-on tie, a tie bar, and cigarette butts. The FBI carefully logged every flight adjustment and every demand. Landing gear down, flaps at 15 degrees. Cabin depressurized, rear staircase engaged. It sounded less like a passenger's request and more like a trained operator's checklist. The pilots explained long-distance flight was impossible under those settings. Reno was agreed as a refueling stop. At one point, Cooper insisted the rear stairs stay open on takeoff, then casually decided,
Fine, I'll just jump midair.
Moments later, the cabin's pressure dropped sharply. That was the signal he was gone. But the drop zone never confirmed. It remains the only unsolved skyjacking in United States aviation history. For 45 years, the FBI chased leads, but Cooper's fate, still a mystery. The Boeing 727 had a rear staircase, an exit you could actually use mid-flight, and Cooper exploited that detail perfectly. Once the plane was locked into his low-altitude, low-speed settings, the stairs became usable in the air. That's not something a regular passenger would ever know. After the hijacking, the FAA and Boeing installed the so-called Cooper vane. It made in-air deployment impossible. Soon after, airports rolled out mandatory metal detectors and baggage screening. By 1973, hijackings dropped sharply. One jump had changed aviation security forever. Fast forward to February 1980. On the Columbia River's Tena Bar, a boy digging in the sand uncovered a rotting bag.
So he raked a place out in the sand there in their woods. It kind of tumbled up on the top.
The only Cooper cash ever recovered from that hijacking event in 1971.
Inside were bundles of $20 bills, about $5,800, barely holding together. And the serial numbers were a perfect match to the ransom bills. But that discovery only sparked bigger questions. The site was more than 20 miles off the projected drop zone. Some said the river carried it, but records showed in 1974 a dredging project dumped tons of soil onto that beach, enough to reshape the shoreline by dozens of meters. So did the cash drift there naturally, or was it planted? The money in the sand reignited the case, but it revealed nothing about who Cooper really was. Flight attendants all said the same thing.
He was calm, polite, almost gentlemanly.
He instantly spotted the faulty parachute, and he knew exactly how the 727's rear stairs worked. At the very least, he looked like someone with parachuting or aviation know-how. Some researchers even compared his method to covert drop tactics from the Vietnam War. Of course, that link to intelligence or government ops is speculation. But his composure suggested he wasn't just a thief, he was prepared. The next clue poured fuel on the fire. Cooper's abandoned clip-on tie. In the 2010s, there was Citizen Sleuths, an independent civilian team working with the FBI. They analyzed the tie under an electron microscope, finding hundreds of microscopic particles. The results were clear: titanium, rare metals, traces found mostly in Boeing plants or restricted research labs. In 2024, a new study suggested the titanium matched residue from industrial machinery, and that raised a new question. Was he a jumper? Or an engineer who knew the systems inside out? Dust from a factory floor might be the closest thing to his fingerprint. Just a year later, copycats flooded America. Richard McCoy pulled off a near-identical jump, but he was caught. The pattern was the same: night flight, rear stairs, parachute, cash demand. Over 15 attempts in just a few years. The press dubbed it the skyjack era. But the original only grew more legendary because Cooper's identity was never cracked. For decades, suspects lined up: Green Beret, Richard McCoy, Northwest employee Kenneth Christensen, Boeing skydiver Sheridan Peterson. But fingerprints and DNA ruled them all out. Hundreds even confessed, claiming I was Cooper. Each false lead only fed the legend. On July 12, 2016, the FBI officially closed the active case. They said resources were better spent elsewhere, but they still left the tip line open.
Turn in parachutes or cash if you find them.
But files kept surfacing. In the summer of 2025, a 398-page FBI dossier grabbed attention again. Inside were the rare tie particles, how suspect tips were handled, and efforts to curb false confessions. The core fact remains: DNA, prints, and evidence still don't line up. The investigation is over, but the paper trail still points somewhere. Unknown identity, but the smell of factories, aviation, and electronics. And private analysis keeps piling up. That's why people still chase this case. Skeptics argue his survival odds were slim to none. And they have a point. Freezing temps, brutal storms, forest terrain, poor gear. And above all, the missing ransom. There's no clear trail of the cash ever being spent. Even with skill and calm, the winds that night could have killed him. Which is why the death theory remains the most conservative and the most convincing answer, at least in official files. Still, two other theories refuse to die. First, the survival theory. He could have been tied to aviation or industry. With insider knowledge, he escaped. He may have ditched or hidden part of the money to throw off investigators. Second, the cover-up theory. His technical demands and the metallic particles suggest access to secure facilities. Government ties, defense contractors, military background. Possible but unproven. In the end, all signs point back to the dust on the tie. And those particles whisper,
he wasn't just a thief.
All we can hold on to now are fragments, slipping like sand through our fingers. The money at Tena Bar, the 727's rear stairs, the factory dust on his tie. 50 years later, the case is still alive. Every month, Reddit threads and YouTube videos demand fresh DNA testing. New theories appear, the FBI may have stopped, but the hunt hasn't. That night, he shed a name and vanished into the air. And we're left with a question. Was he a criminal? An engineer? Or the shadow of a system? Somewhere, Cooper speaks.
Leaving the tie behind wasn't a mistake. Inside it were traces of who I really was.
Share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think really happened? Don't miss out on the next content. Subscribe, like, and turn on notifications.